Hello, we're so glad you joined us today. I'm here with Paula Prober, and Paula is a licensed psychotherapist and consultant in private practice in Eugene, Oregon, and she specializes in counseling gifted adults and youth in the state of Oregon. But of course, she consults with parents of gifted children with gifted adults internationally. Her book, Your Rainforest Mind, A Guide to the Well-Being of Gifted Adults and Youth, was released in June 2016. And I've been using it in my own practice ever since it came out. She also has a second book, Journey into Your Rainforest Mind, a field guide for gifted adults and teens, book lovers, overthinkers, geeks, sensitives, brainiacs, intuitives, procrastinators, and perfectionists. You can find out much more about Paula at rainforestmind.wordpress.com. Paula, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm really happy to be here, Lori.
So I was wondering, how long have you been a psychotherapist? And of those years, how many have been devoted to specializing in the treatment of gifted individuals?
I went back to school for my degree in 1990. It's my second career. I was a teacher actually of gifted kids in the public schools before that. So I got my degree in 92, and then I worked in an agency for about 4 years, a mental health agency. And then I started a private practice, and I started with gifted clients right away in my private practice because I had worked in the schools and knew that there were particular mental health needs that gifted people had. And I loved working with that population. So I thought, I think I need to, just start my practice for gifted adults and teenagers. I worked with teenagers for a while too.
Mm-hmm. We have that in common. My very first job was a special education counselor, and in New Mexico, gifted is part of special education. And I found it absolutely fascinating that the majority of my caseload turned out to be gifted individuals with their very unique needs. What were you seeing as you were practicing in the school? Were some of those unique needs that gifted individuals have?
Well, probably those things that you noticed too, the levels of sensitivity and the different sensitivities in different areas, and sometimes the tendency for people to pathologize those sensitivities, the empathy, the ability to, feel what's going on in the room, feel what other kids are feeling, what other people are feeling, and not be able to know whether this is my feeling or is this their feeling, or being overwhelmed by all of that energy, by the energy in the room, in the school, so much going on there, and feeling all of that, the empathy. So that, the loneliness, not finding kids that they could relate to, not finding friends that understood them, that could get them, the schooling challenges, not being challenged in the classroom, those perfectionism, those are some of those areas that I saw when I was teaching the kids. And then it became clear that that would be what I would do with the clients. Although with my counseling clients, I work with trauma. And so I work with gifted adults who were traumatized as children. So when I'm focusing, you probably are aware of this too, as a counselor, I'm only licensed in Oregon. So I only see clients in the state. But my consulting is worldwide, and the consulting is then about the issues that I write about in my books and on the blog, and the counseling is more around trauma.
So about when did you conceptualize the Rainforest Mind, and how did that lead to the book?
It was back when I was teaching school. I was really needing some way to explain giftedness to the teachers. They were not happy with me. I was pulling kids out of their classrooms, and people were very uncomfortable with the label gifted, and what does it mean, and is it IQ, or who qualifies for the program, all of that. And so I just thought, how can I explain this to people where they will feel comfortable and with an understanding of it? And I don't know, I just had one of those moments, right? One of those aha moments, oh, maybe I could think about people as ecosystems. And some people are like deserts, and some people are like meadows, and some are like volcanoes, and some are like rainforests, and they're all beautiful, and they're all valuable and important. And the rainforest is the most complex. And that's our gifted population. You know, they're not better than, the rainforest isn't better than the meadow, but it's very much more complicated in that ecosystem, in the how sensitive it is, how colorful it is, how many resources are there. And so people were more comfortable with that. I mean, I can't say that, you know, that the school system was changed by it, you know, but individuals felt more like it made sense to them. It was a way to make everybody okay, but just these people are different in certain ways. And you know, the analogy, I stretched the analogy a little bit into the idea of chainsaws, and gifted people run into chainsaws, people who are wanting to cut them down, wanting to make them like everyone else. And so that part of the analogy works as well. And so people are just a little more comfortable with that. And then the book came out of the blog. I started blogging, and because I wanted to spread the word more, you know, out there, and use the analogy on the blog. And so I started the blog, and then pretty quickly the GHF people found me, and they have a small press, and they asked me to write a book. And I had already started writing it, and so I just finished it and sent it to them, and they're the publisher for the first book. And it just made sense to call it Your Rainforest Mind, because people definitely relate to that analogy. They tell me, they say, I'm not gifted, but I think I have a rainforest mind.
I was just going to lead into that, because many people have difficulty saying I'm gifted or owning that. How does one know if they have a rainforest mind?
Well, I have a quiz that they can take. It's a quiz on my blog, and it's in the book, and there are about 24 questions. And it's like, I really enjoyed writing it because I wanted to make it kind of humorous, but make clear what are the characteristics, what are the traits. And so there are just 24 funny questions that people can use to determine whether they have a rainforest mind. But it's kind of those things that, you know, that a lot of people are familiar with, the complex thinking, many interests, the extreme curiosity, the wanting to do everything, avid readers usually, you know, unless they have some kind of a disability in reading, loving learning, the sensitivity, the perfectionism, the overthinking, what we call overthinking, which I don't think is overthinking for the gifted. It's just normal, right? So those are some of the traits. Yeah.
So as you were learning more about the traits, and as you were writing more about the traits and digging in deeper, did you have some aha moments about your own self?
Yeah. Well, that's always, you know, an interesting question. I've worked with these people for so many years now in my counseling practice. And so I know a gifted person when I see one. Mm-hmm. And for myself, I feel like I'm on the spectrum. You know, we have the spectrum, right? And I joke about it, but I think it's true. I think I'm more at the, you know, at the lower end of the spectrum. I think there's like, you know, there's the exceptional gifted, the profoundly gifted, and then I say that they're the barely gifted. And I'm probably, you know, is somewhere in that zone in the barely gifted. No, it's true, really. No. And I know people say, oh, the imposter syndrome and all that. But I know what giftedness is, because, you know, I know those people, and I have great ability to, I mean, I think I'm a very good counselor and writer and consultant. So I think I'm really good at this. But I think when you talk about, and I think I have a lot of the sensitivities and the empathy for sure. You know, the mental cognitive capacity isn't as high as many of the people that I work with, but I'm still able to, you know, to do the therapy with them for sure, and the consulting. Anyway, it is an awkward question, I know.
Well, and part of the Rainforest Mind piece, I think, it doesn't elevate the cognitive capacity as the one outstanding trait. There are so many different traits that the Rainforest Mind encompasses that I think it really does help people to see themselves more clearly without using that term gifted. And I appreciate that about the book, that it is an all-encompassing, there are many different traits that we need to look at. I love your book, you already know that, and I buy it in bulk because I use that book as a therapy tool with the adolescents and adults that I work with. And I am not just in love with the book itself, but I'm in love with the structure of the book. I love that every chapter has really rich content, and then case studies that make it so so easy to identify with, and then such resources, a plethora of resources at the end of each chapter. Can you talk a little bit about each of those things, kind of how you made that structure, how you came up with the content, how you chose your chapters, your case studies, and where you came up with all those resources? Oh my goodness.
Well, I've gathered the resources over the years. This is that part of me that wants to learn everything. And I'm always looking for the next thing. And so I have a pile of books, everywhere, and articles, and partly just for my own interest and to refer to clients, And so over time, I had just gathered these resources. So it really wasn't that hard when I came to writing the book to just put those resources in those chapters. And what was your other question? Oh, that I wanted to make it understandable. I didn't want to write an academic, dry book describing, these are the overexcitabilities and this is the da da da. I wanted it interesting for people because I wanted to appeal to maybe to educators or to therapists, people who might not necessarily be gifted but need to understand it. And so case studies are usually the best way to do that, where you're really describing people and their stories, and then readers can relate to those. And I made sure I got permission from all of those clients, and I didn't identify them. I mean, I changed some of the details so that people wouldn't be identifiable, but my clients were all happy to be included. And so I just felt like that was the way to really reach people. And then the beginning, of course, of each chapter, choosing a topic based on what I keep running into all the time. That's how I chose those topics. And then writing a little explanation, and then making the case study and including the challenges that these people had, and how we resolved them. I thought was just an appealing way to write about it.
Well, I think you really hit the nail on the head, because it's definitely the most usable book that I have found for my clients. When you were writing about your case studies, I think there's something that you touched upon in terms of making it real for people. And I have people annotate their books. I give them a book when they start therapy, and they annotate and they underline, and what's meaningful to them and who did they identify with. And I find that part, the case study part, is where they most identify. They see themselves in the people that you've chosen to illustrate. And it was a wonderful way to make it real to everybody. They have a hard time writing. Most of them are perfectionists, and they don't want to mess up the book. So they don't want to write in the book. I have to give them permission. You may write in the book. I need you to write in the book. But they are so happy that they have when we get back together, because each week we generally do a chapter a week. And when they're able to go back and remember that the feeling they had when they read that piece about that person, or when they tried that resource and they etched in the margins, this is what happened when I tried this or that, has been really helpful to them. So I really appreciate that format that you came up with. So what was your favorite chapter to write, and why was it your favorite?
Well, I'm thinking that really probably the favorite thing to write was more the quiz.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that there was a favorite chapter to write. Um, it was more that I like trying to make this information more lighthearted because, you know, everything we read, it's so serious about this topic, right? And so I like to try to, is there a way to bring humor into this in some way? Because, you know, people can take it in better too when there's humor. And so really the most fun part, or the thing that I liked the most, was writing the quiz. Yeah. That makes sense.
That's awesome. Yes, that does. That does. Was there a part that was more difficult to write than others?
I think I could say that. You know, I was thinking about that, and one of the chapter, probably the chapter on schooling, was more difficult because I don't want to bash anybody, you know, or be hard on teachers or be real negative. But I wanted to be honest about a lot of people's experiences in school and how hard it is, how challenging it is, how in some cases the schooling system is just doesn't meet the needs of these kids. Oh, you know, and frequently that's the case, right? So I wanted to say that honestly, but I didn't want to also beat up on teachers or so
Right.
that I guess when I think back on it, that was one of the harder chapters to write. And then the other one I probably would say would be the one on the one on spirituality and creativity, because it's huge. It's like, how do I write a little chapter in a little book? You know, thinking, who am I to write about spirituality and creativity? It's like, so I think maybe my imposter syndrome came up more with that chapter. But I wanted to include it. It's all authenticity, spirituality, and creativity, huge topics.
Right.
But I couldn't write the book and leave them out. So that was hard. That was harder to write.
So when you talk about that chapter about schooling, early on in our interview, you talked about the chainsaws that gifted people run into, and often that happens in the school system. When you were talking to teachers and using the metaphor, because you don't want to bash teachers, you know, but you want them to understand, what were some of the chainsaws that you talked to them about, and how did you explain those to the teachers?
You know, it's been a long time since I've been in the schools. That was my first career. So, I don't know. I don't know if I can think of a good example for that. You know, I was young and I got out of schooling when I was 39. I went back for my degree. So, so I'm not sure that I have to think about that for a while. Yeah, before I could really, um, you know, answer that well. You know, what's coming to mind is just more the idea that that I listened to teachers, that I tried to, you know, listen with empathy and hear what they're saying and hear their frustrations and validate their frustrations. You know, I think that's probably a good piece of advice for all of us, right? Feel compassion for the how difficult it is to run a classroom with 30 children. You know, it's like, so starting with listening and empathy, and then talking about an individual child and saying, so how can we, you know, tweak this a little bit? Here are some ideas on what you might do so that this child is more challenged in the classroom. And, you know, and sometimes it's telling the teachers how much the kids love those teachers who love their subject. You know, of course, this is with older kids, you know, junior high and high school, but, you know, and giving a lot of validation to those, you know, the kids, they don't care about the subject, right? If the teacher loves what they're teaching and is enthusiastic, those kids love those teachers, right? And they may not be challenged every second, but they're inspired by a teacher who loves their subject. So I think sharing that with some teachers was also helpful. So I don't know if that answers your questions, but those are some thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about kind of that next stage after school and college. And, you know, there's that stage that I find with the young adults that I work with when they're entering into college, and sometimes even prior to that. What am I going to do with my life? How do I find where I'm going to make a difference? How do I find my purpose? So many of our gifted kiddos, they struggle with that because they're multi-potential. So they're good at a lot of different things. Some of them, I also find, have a lot of pressure on them from their parents because of their giftedness, from their parents or teachers. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be, you know, these very professional things. How do you help that part of your gifted clients, helping them to find what they do next?
One thought with that is that I tell them they don't have to do one thing the rest of their lives, right? It's such a big decision. What am I supposed to do? You know, what kind of career, what kind of job, and they can't choose because they have so many interests. So it helped. It's like, really, I don't, you know, they don't realize that. No, actually, you can change your career path multiple times during your lifetime. So that helps them choose what are you passionate about right now? What are you really interested in today? And let's look at that and see if there's a way to create a career path out of that, and know that, you know, and I'll say to them, people with multi-potentiality sometimes just stay in something for a couple years. You know, they learn everything they can about it, right? They just get into it and they love it. But then after 2 or 3 years, they've learned everything, and that's what they want. They want something new.
Right.
So I will tell them it's okay to change. And then they'll say, you know, well, but if I have all these different jobs on my resume, it's going to look like I'm flaky, you know? And I'll say, well, to some people it might, but you can make a case for yourself. You know, you have the capacity, you know, when somebody listens to you talk and you explain who you are and your interests and how they change, people will hire you because you're just so amazing. So that's helpful sometimes, you know. And then I do have to say that I have a client right now who's really struggling, and we haven't figured it out yet. It's like he has so many things he wants to do, and he can't choose, and it's really hard. We haven't, there's not an answer yet. And what I would say about him is that it's complicated, and there's more than just being a gifted person. He's got, you know, this is the counselor in me, right?
Mm-hmm.
His father issues, you know, how he was raised by his parents, what are their beliefs, what does he think he has to do because of how he was raised by them. So we go into that so that it includes, because I can counsel him, he lives in Oregon, you know, we are looking beyond the multi-potentiality to the other issues that may be factors.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought that up, because I find that is definitely an issue, and it plays a part in not being able to find your way sometimes because you're being held back by the way that you were raised or the expectations that are on you. Thank you so much for that. Another area I'm curious how you might, I'm sure that you have a lot of perfectionist clients, and that their perfectionism actually becomes an anxiety disorder and rather debilitating in terms of moving forward in their lives. How do you approach perfectionism with your clients?
Well, you know, the answer is it depends, right? Everyone's different. So there isn't, you know, it's sort of like, so I wrote the chapter on perfectionism, and I loved writing that chapter because I had some examples where I could include the complexity of what perfectionism is, and all the different pieces of it. And you know, then the whole thing about differentiating between healthy perfectionism and unhealthy perfectionism, right? And explaining to them that there is an innate something in you that I believe that gifted people were born with, because I see it in everybody. And I explain it as that innate desire for beauty, balance, harmony, precision, and justice, right? About those things.
Right.
And that's a beautiful thing to have. And so I'll say, you want to differentiate between that, which you just need to have to accept and love it about yourself, and maybe prioritize some things, you know, so that you don't get bogged down in it all the time. But then differentiate between that and the what I call extrinsic perfectionism, which is that pressure to get it all right all the time, fear of failure. I'm not worthy if I don't do it perfectly all the time. You know, I have to achieve, I have to be a high achiever. You know, the pressure that sometimes comes from being raised with what you described, you know, you're going to be a doctor, you're so smart, you could do anything. You know, it's like the pressure of the great potential. So I differentiate those two. And then if they've got the external, extrinsic perfectionism, that's a process that takes time. You know, so just, you know, right, understanding that there's not a quick fix for that. And we look at again, the family dynamics and where did it start? And then, let's see, you know, one of the tools, saying that we all have different parts of ourselves, and your perfectionist is a part. Get to know that part of yourself. Mm-hmm. If it's a female, what does she look like? How does she dress? You know, what does she sound like? You know, somebody who's creative would enjoy this, right? And then talk to your perfectionist part. Maybe it's your inner critic. Maybe that's the same thing, you know. And if your perfectionist is an inner critic, start dialoguing with that part of yourself and see how she's trying to help you, how you can get her to back off, how you can negotiate with her so she's not always on your case, stopping you from, you know, getting things done. Anyway, so that's one of the techniques that I share with people.
That's a fabulous technique. Thank you for sharing it with us. Can you talk to us a little bit about your field guide? How is that different from your Rainforest Mind?
Yes. So the second book came out of people's desires for me to take the blog and make it into a book. You know how some people like books rather than reading online, reading on the screen. And so, I got some requests to make the blog into a book and organize it by topic. Because right now, if you go to the blog, you know, it's not all, you know, it's not this, these are perfectionism, these are on imposter syndrome, these are on sensitivities, they're all over the place. So that book was an organized blog, really, for the first 4 years. I've been writing the blog for 6 years.
Wow. Congratulations. That's quite a while.
Yes. And I still love it. It's still fun, you know, and I still get new people and people really appreciating it. So the first 4 years, the most popular blog posts organized by topic. And then I have, at the end of each chapter, journal writing kinds of things that people can do to get more into whatever the topic is. And then my other, reason for putting it together was that it's an easier read. It's not as in-depth. And so someone who, you know, you might want somebody to understand you and who doesn't want to read the first book because it's just too much. But the second book, it's funny, you know, the blog posts, some of them are humorous. And so you can give it to a friend, you can give it to your teenager, you can give it to your teacher, and maybe they'll read it, you know, or they'll read parts of it and then they'll go, oh, or you can talk to them about parts of it and it's not so serious, but it gets the point across. It explains what it is to be gifted. So that's why I wrote that one.
I think they're both very valuable, but I love that first one and all that it does for me.
The first one is better for what your purposes are, right? You want to go in depth. You want your kids. clients to really see themselves in more depth. So that makes sense.
So I was wondering, do you use your own book in your therapy as a therapy tool?
It's funny, you know, I don't. I recommend it, you know, that people read it, but I haven't done groups in a long time. It's interesting. I used to do gifted groups for gifted women, and that was before I had the book, you know. So I think the book is, the way you use it is great, and I think you know, it would be interesting to get the word out to more therapists that it's just, you know, it's like a study guide. You can, and when you do groups, you have the book, you have the guide, you have the information. You don't need to invent it. You can just use the book. But you know, I haven't. I haven't. I just recommend it for them to read.
Okay. How has your practice changed, or has it changed during COVID?
Hmm. Well, you know, of course, everything's online,
Mhm.
and so that's, you know, it's just not, it's not ideal. It's in person is so much richer, right, and better, but it hasn't been bad online. You know, I mean, um, it, really, I guess I'm not as affected by the screen. I know, so I have some therapist friends who are exhausted after a couple hours on the screen. And somehow I don't know what it is. I'm less sensitive to screen, whatever, you know, so I'm okay with that. And some people you know, I use Zoom or FaceTime or the phone. I've got some people who just want to talk on the phone, you know?
Mhm.
So, so it's sad. It's sad to not see people in person, but online hasn't been so bad. And of course, the topics. You know, you know, we are also talking about how to deal with living during a pandemic, and you know, all of the things that are happening right now that are there's so much upheaval and so much change, and some positive change, you know, and some very stressful times. So in that way, my practice has changed because we're talking more about those things.
Mhm. Do you think that the Rainforest Mind book is a help to those during COVID? Do you feel like it could be a resource and a support during COVID?
Oh, sure. I think just because, you know, I feel like I'm still sending out the same message during this time, right? It's heal yourself, do your inner work, um, heal from the trauma in childhood, understand yourself as a gifted person and what you're here on the planet to do. Find your voice, find your authenticity, find your connection to spirituality, and repair any wounding from whether it was being gifted or whether it was your family system, the legacy from your ancestors, you know. So the message is really the same. And then how are what's the word? You know, you feel more self-confident, feel your authenticity, know what your message is, know what your voice is, and what you know, for me, it's like, what is your purpose on the planet? What are you here to do? And if you feel more understanding of yourself as a person with the rainforest mind, and you in your self-acceptance, self-understanding, and what do you know, how can you contribute? And most gifted people that I know, you know, have that drive to make a difference and contribute. So in that way, things haven't changed so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the self-awareness piece, whether it's the Rainforest Mind, whether it's the field guide, whether, you know, it's another book, another quiz, but any way that we can bring self-awareness to our clients so that they know better what they are passionate about, what they have to give back, because I do see that drive in all of the clients that I have as well, is that I have to be able to give back in some way. I have to have a purpose. What is my purpose in this world? And many of them come to therapy just for that question. Help me find my purpose. And so I don't think that has changed much. And I think your book is timeless in terms of, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's, a typical time, that it helps bring self-awareness to our very gifted clients. And there are
right, self-acceptance.
absolutely, absolutely. What's next on the horizon for you?
Huh. Well, that's an interesting question. I'm trying to figure that out myself. I don't know yet. I'm kind of in that void place, where it's like, what's next? And I think about sometimes maybe something that's more video or some online program, or maybe another book. I'm exploring my own spirituality through sound. There's this whole field of sound healing, and I'm interested in that, and I do a little bit of work with sound myself and exploring that. And so but yeah, no, I don't have anything yet ready to put out. So I don't know yet, but I will let you know when I figured it out.
Oh, that would be wonderful. So are you using the sound healing in your therapy or just with yourself?
I am actually doing it with some clients, and I don't even call it healing. I don't like to, it's not like I'm a healer,
Mm-hmm.
It's exploring the use of sound through the voice as a as a relaxation tool, or as a connection to spirituality, it's really, I'm not even, it's unclear at this point. I know there are people who have really developed it as a tool. They use tuning forks, or they use, different vibrations with different chakras. And, it can be a really complicated field. And I'm not really in that, but I do explore some sound making with clients that have found it really soothing and helpful in some ways, but I'm not ready to let go on prime time.
Okay, but thank you for sharing that with us. We're all interested in some of the newer types of strategies and techniques. So I think that's great. I know we have a little bit of time left. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about empathy and gifted as empaths, and what you have seen in your practice regarding that area.
Okay. Well, I've definitely seen it, a lot of it, from just the empathy that would be compassionate people who feel for others. There's that, and then there's the empathy that is an empath, where you are tuning into, and you kind of can sense what the other person's feeling. You can pick up what they are thinking sometimes, what they're feeling, and that's kind of bleeds into intuitive,
Mm-hmm.
and the psychic abilities. The people who are, can just tune in. I have someone who's what do you call her? A medical intuitive. She's got those skills where she's been able to tell people what's going on in their bodies, and it's accurate. So it's kind of like the range, that empathy, that sensitivity, a type of sensitivity, and a type of intuitive sensitivity. I've seen a lot of that, and I think that that to me comes with the Rainforest Mind person, not necessarily the intellectually gifted person who is just mentally, the high IQ person who is the math genius or something like that, who is the prodigy in one area. This is why I wrote the Rainforest Mind book too, right? Because there are different types of gifted, and not every intellectually advanced person has empathy.
Right.
But the Rainforest Mind person does. So they're gifted intellectually and with empathy. And so I have seen a lot. And I recommend, the books, Christian Northrup wrote a book about, I think, unfortunately, the title is something like Energy Vampires or something like that. It's like, oh, that's an unfortunate title, but, she's got some good ideas. Judith Orloff, the people who write about empathy and intuition. Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I have a couple of people that are just really, really talented in that area, and it makes me, I want to say it makes me hopeful for humanity, because I feel like this is what's possible. Human beings have much more possibility than we give them credit for, you know, and in these areas. I recently worked with somebody who I would say is profoundly gifted. I just wrote a blog post about her, and with her, you know, because, you know, there aren't as many PG people out there, and I don't run into them as often, but this woman has that. And so she's got so much empathy and so much compassion and so much drive to make a difference and all the things, you know, in a big way. And so it makes me think, this is the possible human. You know, this is like, are these the evolved humans? This is what people could be. And it's like, okay, so humans can be that. It just gives me a sense of hope for our world, you know, that if we nourish these people, yeah, maybe make some positive changes.
Well, and I think that's, you know, that's what it's all about, is being able to nurture those people rather than send them into the chainsaws, as you said, finding nurturing environments for them and finding resources for them, such as your books and other books. But it is so very, very important. And the needs of our gifted individuals are unique. And it's important to get that word out and help people to understand. What would you like to leave people with today? Do you have some final words that?
Yeah, I think that coming back to what we said about, about how important it is to do your inner work, and how it's not selfish and it's not self-indulgent and it's not, it's not like self-absorbed. It's important to do the inner healing work, because that's the way you can do the best for society. That's the way you can make the positive, loving, compassionate contribution, because you've healed the wounding inside. You feel more self-confident. You can be your authentic self. So, you know, and I guess the other thing, which you may relate to this too, is that as a therapist, people, gifted people go deep. You know, you do deep therapy. You don't do Band-Aid therapy. You don't just give them affirmations to say. You know, that's not enough for a gifted person. They need the deep grief work, right? The repair work, the looking at the trauma and healing from the past. And that takes time, even for smart people, you know, right? They want to do it fast because they learn everything quickly. And you don't heal from trauma quickly. And so giving, I would say, you know, to your listeners, right? Giving them, let them give themselves the gift of time to do the deeper healing work, because, and it takes time, and to let themselves, you know, to know that emotional, psychological healing isn't as fast as learning how to, you know, do the computer or something or other, right? So I guess just reminding them of that, and that it's worth it, and that it's a good thing, a good way to use your time. And that's what will make a difference for you in life, in being able to be good with your children, you know, not pass down trauma to your children, right? Unconsciously, or I tell people that's the best gift you give your kids, when you heal yourself and find out who you really are and live that life.
Thank you so much. We so much appreciate your advice, your book, your presence, your blog. Thank you so very much for being here with us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Lori. It was great talking to you.
You too. Thank you.